Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Hey, coming here with another podcast. Thanks for joining me. It's certainly wonderful and appreciate you guys as an audience. That made no sense in that opening line, but we'll use it anyway because you guys are wonderful and you guys are an awesome audience. So thanks for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed to the Chris Voss Show podcast, please go to iTunes, Google Play, and subscribe. And you can also subscribe on YouTube as well, so you get updates on all the different reviews and different things I do on the Chris Voss Show. Pretty excited. We got South by Southwest coming up, so be sure to watch for our coverage there. We're taking on sponsors right now for South by, so this should be pretty interesting, as South by always is. Very eclectic festival with interactive film, music, and everything else. So we're going to look forward to being there next month and all that fun stuff. One thing I want to talk about today, since we don't have a guest, is a topic I was looking at that's very close to my heart. Now, the other day, I did a post on Facebook, a live post that we'll be putting on the podcast before this. So if you get a chance, catch that. It talks about the year's journey from me losing a lot of weight, about 70 pounds that I lost in about 3 months. A year and a half ago, or it began a year and a half ago and started over that time period. And I talked about some of the issues that I ran into and was reminded of some of the rules that I had broken back then on what my brain associated with rules. Well, we have to have caffeine and Mountain Dew, and we have to have this, and you have to have, all these have-tos that you build in a belief system around that support you buying into bullshit theories that are unhealthy for you. Of course, we do that with a lot of different things. But in this case, it was unhealthy diet and unhealthy consumption of pop, everything else. And a year and a half ago, I quit pop, cold turkey, quit pop, replaced it with coffee. And I started removing a lot of the sugars, a lot of the bad foods out of my system. I started eating live foods that were fresh, that were organic. They didn't always have to be organic. I mean, certainly bananas don't really need some organic stuff. But again, it wasn't that big of a deal, but I basically became kind of vegan, where I started eating live, fresh foods that weren't dead, that hadn't been dead and frozen in a package, blanched with sodium to keep foods that are dead in the middle of the store, et cetera, et cetera. So what I want to talk about today, you can go back and listen to that on the prior podcast. But I lost a lot of weight and amazed a lot of people. And the amount of weight I was losing was very quickly, mainly because at the time I was consuming 10 to 15 Mountain Dews a day at the very least. And of course I was eating, as a single guy, like all the frozen ugly food, the Stouffer's, the Marie Callender's, all that frozen food in the thing. And so I went through a journey that I share with my Facebook audience, where I took and showed them what I was doing. I posted pictures of my food cart on what I was buying every day, and posted pictures of my receipts so people could see how cheap it was to eat the way I was eating. And a lot of people, they have these misnomers or these rules, or what you might call blind spots, scotomas in their brain, about how, well, eating fresh food costs more. And it actually doesn't. It's kind of interesting how that dynamic has changed, where for some reason it costs an incredible amount of money to eat at McDonald's. I remember when I was a kid eating there very cheaply. And I think back then it was cheaper to go to McDonald's than it was to the store. I don't remember, because I wasn't in charge of shopping at that time, but it just kind of seemed to be that way. It was super, super cheap to go to the fast food compared to what it's now. In fact, now I look at the live foods that I buy, the produce that I buy, and it actually is pretty expensive in itself. But when I look at some of the fake food, the McFrankenstein food that's out there, it's quite a lot expensive. And I can tell you, when I go to the store and I buy a cart full of produce and live foods, the price is much cheaper than and by half as much as I would say if I were to buy all the junk food. So it's kind of interesting. They're actually charging more now for junk food than they are for just eating good, healthy food. So let's talk about what I want to talk about today, in extending that conversation that I had on the prior podcast. This is an article from the New York Times. So you can check this out. The title of it is, if you want to search, is "In Sweeping War on Obesity, Chile Slays Tony the Tiger." This is an article written by Andrew Jacobs of the New York Times, and it's come out on February 7th, 2018, for those of you who may be getting this at a later date. And it's kind of interesting what they've done here. They've done what we probably should have done with our food base a long time ago. Now, if you watch a lot of movies and do your research, you find out that in the 70s, they started doing different things with corn syrup, and they started doing stuff with subsidizing our corn so that they can make it super in huge amounts and make it super cheap. And part of this subsidization comes from our government. And what came out of that was them taking corn syrup to this extreme superfood level, which is just a super sugar level when it comes down to it. I'm not sure. Can we call that food? I suppose sugar is food technically, in some sort of technical manner of assimilation. Certainly the way I used to consume it, it was food. And so what happened was, out of that, we now see the dilemmas of an obese nation, diabetes out of control, et cetera, et cetera. Chile, in the New York Times report, has done something really different. Now, when I grew up, one of the worst things my parents could ever do, and my mom would leave us in the car to keep us from going shopping. I can't blame her, really, because we weren't that great at kids. Going down the cereal aisle for any parent, or the candy aisle, I'm sure, is just as bad. But going down that cereal aisle, the kids fall in love with the cartoon, Tony the Tiger. The Count Dracula box I remember loving when I was a kid. And the commercials will come on TV, call Dracula, and you're like, I want some of that. And you're just like, when you really think about what you wanted back then, you really didn't have a concise actualization of what is it that I want. I want something because it's a cute cartoon. And it's interesting to me, and one question I have on my mind, we went through this thing with smoking, where smoking was bad, and we started noticing that people started dying from smoking, and cancers, everything started really taking off when it came to cancers. And so we started curtailing them, but we started to notice that they were doing stuff in marketing to market to young kids and to make cigarettes cool for young people, to capture them at the point of where they were in their, trying to find themselves. And, of course, you would see it in Hollywood on the movies, the cool smoking thing. Turns out there was a lot of money that flooded into the movies in Hollywood, as far back as Hollywood goes, to where they were making they're paying Hollywood stars to, make these scenes to make cigarettes seem so awesome. And so we started banning that. I think it was the late 80s, early 90s. I think it was the late 80s when it kind of started the war on cracking down on cigarette companies. And I think we're kind of at that juxtaposition now where we need to start looking at sugar as a drug. And I talked about this in my prior podcast. I had someone who follows me on Facebook, whose name escapes me right now, but they asked a question that I used to struggle with when I was drinking 10 to 15 Mountain Dews a day. They said, well, Chris, what do you do, what do you do for caffeine? What do you do to get yourself up? And I explained to them that I don't really have to get myself up anymore, because what I was doing was using sugar as a kind of a heroin fix, crack fix. To me, sugar is a drug. Especially if it's abused. But it really is a drug, because it can give you a high that's, for some people, is almost as good as a crack, heroin, meth high, or whatever the case is. I've never tried those things, so I can't really give you a first-hand account as to which is better. But sugar is a nice legal high. And certainly if you've seen any kid shoot a can of Coke or whatever, a whole pile of candy, and then you watch them bing off the walls for a couple hours afterwards, you can't get into bed, the power of crack sugar or we'll just call it sugar. But when I use those sort of terms, you kind of get what I'm referring to. So you're like, cracked sugar, is that new? So anyway, what they've done in Chile is Chile has about 18 million people in it. And their nutrition people have been in a war for like the last 10 years with the corporations. And in the end, guess what? The corporations have kind of lost. So it's pretty amazing. So what they've demanded with rules and regulations is that you can't use cartoon figures like Tony the Tiger, Count Dracula, those tricks for kids things, and all those different cartoons that you see when you walk down the cereal aisle and you turn on Saturday TV with the cartoons. They can't use those anymore in Chile to market to kids. And I think that's brilliant. They had to remove the faces off the boxes. They can just post the cereal there. And it's pretty interesting. And they had seen huge rises in their health and obesity rates that were just going through the roof. On top of that, they will not allow you, just like smoking. I remember growing up as a kid and looking through the magazines, and like every other page was smoking ad, watching the TV about the Marlboro Man, the commercials. I remember those. And of course, print, radio. I mean, they were everywhere. Smoking and being cool smoking was everywhere. And so, it's interesting how this stuff is peddled, because it's peddled with these cartoon characters that as a kid, they look cute. You're like, I want to eat that food. And it's like, you don't even know what's in that food, how bad it is for you, how awful it is for you. They've even found in studies that with kids, if they feed them a decent diet, they become less ADD, they become less hyperactive, they tend to learn better, everything else. But if you're injecting rocket fuel into these kids with sugar, you're going to have problems. I remember as a child, I had a good friend, and he had a lot of problems at school. He was always in trouble. The teachers were always after him. He was almost so obnoxious, I could barely stand him as a friend. And I think we were like 8 or 10 years old. And my parents grew up poor, and that might have worked out better for me because we weren't eating sugary treat cereals as a child. So I guess I should thank my parents for that, and good for them, I guess. I ate, scrambled eggs and stuff, but I wanted, watching the TV, Count Dracula says I should get this, Tony the Tiger, Frosted Flakes. And I remember going over to my friend's house who had all the problems, and he would pull a bowl of, like, I think it was Twix or something, with all the flavor candies. He'd pour that damn bowl, and then they fill it with milk, and then what he'd do is he'd pile on like a mound of sugar. We're not talking like a little mound. We're talking like a volcano, fucking like here's the bowl, and here's like the fucking mound. And he would fucking down that thing, and he would mix it all in, and the milk would become so thick, it was almost like a paste. I mean, it wasn't like, it was thicker than soup. It would just become like a gruel or something. I don't know. Or grits, where it has that kind of thickness to it. I guess depending upon how you make your grits. But, and he would eat that thing down. And of course, he would become the most obnoxious person in the world. And I'd want to, you'd hang out with him. And at that point, you want to choke him out half the time. It's like, calm the fuck down. And I can't imagine what sort of his parents went through. And of course, I think his parents were either divorced or, I don't remember. But the parents were never around, obviously. If your kid's pouring that much sugar on your thing, clearly the parents are never around. And I do remember, I don't know if this is connected, but I do remember a couple years past, and one of their parents, I think, was either smoking in bed or something, but they set the house on fire by catching the bed on fire. And I think they fell asleep smoking in bed. So it was just a health bonanza all the way around. So getting back to this article from the New York Times, they have taken and put an 18% tax, one of the steepest soda taxes in the world, onto their soda. So they make it really expensive, where if you want to eat that soda, and you're going to be in a situation where your health's going to get out of control. And I don't really know about Chile. I imagine they probably have socialized medicine. So this is why it's a concern to them, is because they see it in cost towards government and socialization and everything else and what they have to pay for it. But on top of that, they also put these black stop signs. Looks like there's 2 of them on every label, and it goes across any bad foods that have a certain amount of high fat in them, et cetera, et cetera. But they put these black stop sign looking warning labels on any of the products that contribute to bad health. And I think that's brilliant. No one reads the nutrition labels. I mean, in fact, one of the things I was surprised with when I lost all my weight, my 70 pounds in about 4 months, 3 months, 3.5 months it was, I never read the nutrition labels. And in fact, if anything, they're kind of skewed where they tell you per serving, and no one ever pays attention to per serving. You read the back, you're like, 7 grams of fat, 12 grams of saturated fat. That's not bad at all. I'll eat the whole can. That sounds awesome. And then in the really fine print that I've gotten too old to see, it says, a serving size is 1/1000th of a teaspoon. It's like the 7 grams is in a molecular structure that like no person could ever eat and live or subsist on. So I mean, seriously, sit down with any of your nutrition labels, especially ones that have a high amount of sugar in them. Look at, like one of my favorite things used to be salsa. And I was like, you know what? When I start losing weight, I'm going to eat salsa, because salsa is so healthy for you, because it's tomatoes and, it's all these, live foods. If you get good salsa that's in the refrigerated section, it's not dead with preservatives. And one of my friends says, you ever looked at the sodium content of the salsa there, Chris? I'm like, yeah, it doesn't look that bad. And they're like, you realize that's per teaspoon or something, or per every teaspoon. And then I went, wow, I just did a half a jar, and wow, it looks like I just poured a Morton salt container into my mouth and drank like half of it, pretty much. That's what I did. Now, salt is good for you. You're a salt-based creature that crawled out of the primordial soup back in the day. Salt's a very important part of our being. It's if it wasn't for salt, you might not live. But you can't have too much salt, so that's another thing. And there's probably bad and good salt for all I know. But getting back to what they did here in Chile, and I think we're eventually going to get to this. At what point do people need to start dying so much more than they already do? And how long does obesity have to be out of control in America before we finally put our foot down and do something about it? That, or we just can't care to do anything about it because we're so fucking fat and tired and worn out from all the sugar crack that we're doing, that we can't get off the couch to do anything about it. And that's probably where the corporations want us. Make him so fat he can't move off the chair, and he'll just keep shoveling our shit back into his face. So this is really interesting what they've done here, and I think it would do it as well. It looks like Pepsi, Cheetos, Kellogg's have gone to court with the state of Chile, and I guess for 10 years fought with them to try and get this stuff to be overturned, et cetera, et cetera. But when they started seeing these incredible amounts of overweight and obesity, they went, screw this, we're not doing this anymore. Three quarters of the country's population is now overweight or obese since having a lot of this fast food put to them. The medical cost of obesity was 2.4% of all healthcare spending in Chile in 2016, and it could rise to 4% of 2030. Now, if they are, I don't know if they are, but if they are a socialized medicine state, they probably have to utilize that cost. We utilize that cost probably nowadays where we're paying for people in emergency rooms who can't pay the bill, Medicaid costs, et cetera, et cetera. You see people who are like, they've got a donut in one hand and they've got a can of Coke in the other, like, we need to reduce Medicare costs. It's like, hey, buddy, you're right on the train. You just haven't arrived yet. And when you do, we're going to be paying your Medicare costs as well. And it just seems like more and more we get this food and it's so poisonous. And this is one of the things I discovered. I mentioned earlier one of my friends on Facebook who brought up the crack sugar thing. And he said, how do you get yourself up? And I'm like, well, you don't understand, because you're living in this world of jacking yourself with Mountain Dew up and down, is that you live in this sugar crash world where you're constantly up and down. You're shooting sugar heroin basically into your fucking arm, and you go on this really great high, and then you have this huge sugar crash. So what do? You pump another Mountain Dew. Oh, and you go up again. And then you come down again. And it's like this huge, and you're like, I used to drink a Mountain Dew before I went to bed. Sometimes I get up in the middle of the night and drink a Mountain Dew. Oh my God. I just think about what I used to do. I used to live on like Tums and Rolaids. Nowadays, I have like a dead Tums bottle that's probably expired on the date, and I haven't been able to, I just don't take Tums and Rolaids anymore because I'm not pouring all that poison and carbonation in my system. And my body's a lot happier with me. I can tell you that. I feel a lot better. But what's nice is, I used to live with that scotoma that, well, I need this to jack myself up so I can do a bunch of work and I can make a lot of money. And but the problem is the crashes, the ups and the highs and the lows would just come and go. Where now that I don't do that and I eat well, I have a pretty stable sugar system and everything can be fine. And if I get a little tired, I can have a coffee, a little bit of sugar in there. I have like some specialized brown sugar. I believe it's light Moscato or Moscavo sugar that I bring in that gives it just a nice taste to it. So I put a little sugar in there in coffee. A little bit of sugar is okay. And so I use coffee. Sometimes like before this show, I was feeling a little bit tired. And so I went pop some B12 vitamins and the B whatever, all of it vitamins. And so that's all I need. Since I'm not on this sugar crash jack up cycle anymore, I don't have to go to the high highs to get just normal anymore. I don't have to come crashing down the low lows. And that's really the difference that was hard for me to understand when I was living in that sugar drug addicted world, where I was just creating myself as a victim. And I was just constantly, well, I have to get up. I have to get the energy up so I can do more work and make more money. And really, between that and the sugar high where your brain's like going, and you can't focus because you're all cracked down on ADD basically from the sugar injection you gave yourself. You're just lost and you're not as effective as you really think you are. When I can sit around now and I can be very calm and I can think through what I need to do, focus on what I need to do, and really be effective. So anyway, let's see. They were alarmed by childhood obesity rates that were among the world's highest, with over half of their 6-year-old children overweight or obese. Holy crap. And this is really interesting about Chile. Up until the late 1980s, malnutrition was widespread among them, especially children, probably because of their abusive governments they had back then. I believe there was Pinochet was the horrific military leader who really enslaved the country and was just a horror show. If I have my countries right, my memory right. So they went from having malnutrition to now 3/4 of adults are overweight or obese, and over half of their children 6 or older are overweight or obese. The medical costs for them reached $800 million, which is nothing compared to what our medical costs are. And it became 2.4% of all health spending. And so all their scientists got together, elected officials and their public health advocates said, screw the corporations, we're taking care of our people, which is very different than America. And they went after this food as a poison. And in my journey of losing weight, I discovered how poisonous my food was. Just imagine that. I went from, eating a lot of fast food restaurants, a lot of frozen foods from Recounter Stofers. I would just go to the frozen dinner section. That was my world. Bags of chips. Don't even get me started with vodka consumption, which I, mix with Mountain Dew or some sort of other pop sugar. I never counted that as a sugar, which is like so stupid, but you live and you learn. And then, of course, the consumption of Mountain Dew. And the more I started reading the back of these nutritional labels, the more I learned how poisonous my food was and how much crap there was in it and stuff that you, of course, couldn't pronounce. And once I cut that off cold turkey and lost 70 pounds in 3 months, 3.5 months, that showed me how poisonous my food was and how stopping eating it made so much of a difference. And I went from about 370 pounds to, I think my bottom was about 290. And I lost it all. And for the most part, I've kept most all of it off, except for about 10 pounds. And part of it is because I didn't went back to eating that way. I learned whole new different ways to eat that are better. I did lose a dog, so I went through a little bit of grief eating, and that has me, needing to get back on the diet and eating well. But I think we're past that. So, but that just shows you that I could lose 70. Now, let me also make a statement here. I lost those 70 pounds without working out. In fact, I was taking care of my dog with cancer and hospice care. So I was home 24/7, sitting on my front computer like I always do. I do all my work in life from my computer. I drive my car every 3 days to go to the store. I'm very stationary. And so there was no exercising. There was no going to the gym. None of that went into losing that 70 pounds. It was all food. So really think about that. I lost 70 pounds without working out in 3 months, and I didn't work out. That's how poisonous the shit that I've been eating for all my life and what it was doing to my body. And I'd reached a point where I was so unhealthy, I just felt like I was going to have a heart attack. I just felt just like a sitting blob the whole time. And I just felt so awful. I had suicidal thoughts all the time. You just want to die. I felt so trapped too. That was the other challenge, is I felt so trapped because I didn't know how to get out of it. And by simply changing my diet, going vegan for the time, it really wasn't a militant vegan or any other reason why I've been vegan other than to just eat more healthy and lose weight and eat foods that, in my opinion, and in many people's opinion, are that we are at our base DNA plant eaters. We learn to, a lot of people think we learn to eat meat. We learn to eat some of the other things that we did, but at our very core, we were plant eaters. And so that took me back to that. So realizing how poisonous my food was started giving me control over my life, over my weight and everything else. Sadly, not a lot of people, and I, of course, would have been better educated. In looking back, I talked about this, where I wish that when I went to school, there had been classes on nutrition, how to eat right, what to look for in your foods, what is bad for you, what is good for you, et cetera, et cetera. And it's too bad we don't have that today. We teach kids so much bullshit in school that they will never fucking use. I mean, like, when was the last time you used an algorithm that all of us were forced to take in junior high? Like, never. And yet, why couldn't we have taught classes on nutrition at that point? Why couldn't we have taught classes about psychology in how to know what's going on inside your own head, how to take care of your credit, how to manage your finances, how to prepare for being a parent? It's amazing how our school system really doesn't prepare a lot of people for adulthood when it really comes down to it. And they teach a lot of bullshit, like dissecting a frog. Like, what fucking good did that ever do me? The only thing I learned out of school that was important, that changed my life, made me money, and made a difference was my typing class. And that was about it. So anyway, getting back to this, Chile went on this huge sort of battle with the corporation. And it seems like a lot of countries are having these issues, because what has happened is America's companies that have sold us and fed us all the shit has Americanized the food and sent it to other countries. And the other countries are going, hey, we're getting fat from this food, just like those stupid fat Americans. And they're going, we got to either stop this or hopefully they won't. So these guys put this black stop sign label, and you should see it. It's very prominent. It's on any of these bad food things, and you can see it. And what the people have talked about from Chile is, yeah, they never read the nutritional thing on the back. But once they see the big labels, you know, it's the same thing that happened with cigarettes. Where remember when I remember distinctly when we were kids, I think it was the 70s, the early 70s, where they started putting the Surgeon General warning on the box, like this will give you cancer, basically. And of course they evolved from there. But one thing that the parents say in Chile now is putting these big warning labels on and the big black stop signs is they weren't reading the nutrition labels before, but now they're seeing labels. And if the parents don't pay attention, the kids do. The kids go, hey, mommy, that's got a black stop sign label on it. That's probably not good for us. So it's helping educate a new generation of children and people to pay attention to what's in their food and what's going on with it. One of my big things was learning the difference between dead foods and live foods. So nowadays, it looks like they took the Nestle Quick bunny. Remember the bunny that used to be on the Nestle Quick chocolate powder? So they've gone, even like M&Ms, they've taken away the dancing candies, and there's warning signs on them. Cereal bars, yogurts, juice boxes, long advertised as healthy, natural, fortified with vitamins and minerals, now carry black warning labels. Even dressings carry warning labels. And I guess they have up to 4 labels that they use. And depending upon what's in them, you can have 1, 2, 3, 4 labels. So if you get all 4 labels on there, it's like having 4 Surgeon General warnings on your cigarettes. And so this is good. The sad thing is it's probably going to be a while to change people's habits, diets, and what they want to see a modification in how people eat and everything else. So it's going to take time. And of course, they're dealing with corporations that are fighting like fucking mad to have this overturned, and of course have the food industry all to themselves and whatever, and turn us back into the lab rats that we are. You know, if you've seen the way they design food nowadays, they design it in these high-tech labs. Your McDonald's food, everything else is designed in a high-tech lab, just like your opiates and all your crazy drugs that people can get addicted to. Opiates, of course, are just a modified synthetic heroin, really, when it comes down to it, but it's legal. I'm sure they're going to do the same thing with pot one of these days. They'll make a synthetic pot, and then no one will be able to grow pot anymore or something. I don't know. We'll see what happens. So it's really interesting. They put these labels on there. And I guess there's been quite the battle with the industry where they've hired movie stars and stuff to take and, promote their food and their bad food that they should have. And so that's what really it comes down to. The other dynamic of this, I guess a lot of people are unhappy with it, but the other dynamic of this is with computers and cell phones, we become a more stationary people. And I think that problem is in Chile and around the world. I mean, you see yourselves walking around looking at phones. We're laying in bed. We're sitting in chairs. We're dealing with computers where we look at computers. I used to drive to a workplace and walk around my office. And so sometimes I think I put 5 miles on my walking around my office, doing stuff, interacting with our employees. But now I don't do that anymore. I sit in front of a computer all day long. I do all my online interactions. I do all my Gmail and everything else. And if not, I'm probably asleep at night with the iPad and the mount over my head and answering emails and reading news, et cetera, et cetera. And so with this new age of cell phones, age of computers, we've reached this stationary point where they're killing us because we're not active as much. So I think because of that stationary, lifestyle that we now have, where everything is, we're just, we don't have to work for anything hardly at all, just amplifies this bad food that we're eating. So it just makes it worse on top of everything else when it comes to corn syrup and all that good stuff. So it's good that they're taxing stuff. I know New York taxed pop. I don't know if they repealed it or if it's still in. I know people hate it, but hey, there you go. I mean, I'm sure that heroin junkies really hate the fact that heroin's illegal and hard to score. Cocaine, crack, all that sort of stuff. I'm sure they really hate it too. I really hate how this is illegal. This should be easier to get without any problems. Well, there's probably a reason that it should be that way. And sugar probably needs to enter that zone as well. The amount of sugar we consume, the quality of it. I mean, certainly we've learned that high fructose corn syrup is like a jacked up version of sugar that's just fucking insane when it comes to, it's like basically like, I don't know, like sugar is like drinking a vodka shot, and then like high fructose sugar is like shooting crack up your ass or something. That was kind of weird, crack up your ass. Yeah. So anyway, a lot of other Latin countries are looking at this, according to their article, and they're dealing with the epidemic of obesity. And I think we need to do that too in this country. And we also need to look at our kids and try and get them moving more. I know VR gaming is helping kids move around anymore, and they can dance and they can do different things with gaming. But where we have everything so stationary, and of course we live in this world that, as a parent, you've got to, it's more dangerous and all that sort of good stuff. I remember when I grew up as a kid, we play in the street, we throw the ball, we play street hockey, we go climb over everything, build forts and huts on the trees. I mean, if anybody wanted to come by and kidnap us as kids and take us off to whatever, we were certainly, there for the offing. And nowadays you don't see kids outdoors. You don't see them out playing. They're not doing stuff. They're just sitting around the house playing video games online, which I'm also guilty of as well. And we're just a more stationary society. And because of it, I think it makes this poisonous food even worse. So I think as parents and ourselves, in monitoring what we're eating, we have to realize what's going on. And of course, some of these ketomas that we have, I'll eat this and it'll be okay. It's just one time, or whatever the case may be. It doesn't. It creates so much sugar highs. I mean, even for me, I don't drink anymore, but on occasion, I'll go buy a bottle of vodka and I'll drink some of it. And the next 2 or 3 days, because I'm kind of more in tune to how my body is with sugar and stuff, I'll be able to tell that my sugar is messed up and it's totally out of whack. I don't feel right. I don't feel functional. And I'm not drinking a lot of booze. Part of it is my age. And as you get older, you just can't drink a lot of booze and not have hangovers and everything else. You just don't recover as well. But I can feel it. My whole system is just messed up for 2 to 3 days with alcohol. And so it really shows you some of the different problems that are inherent in the quality of our food and the poison in our food. And that's one of the things I learned when I switched from eating the crap that I was eating, the poison I was eating, and learning to eat healthy foods. And then I started noticing my body was just more happier with me. I wasn't taking, 5 to 10 Rolaids a night, waking up with my stomach, carving a hole in it with the alien creature coming out going, Mountain Dew, thanks for that. And you're like, I really want to sleep. I mean, it was so bad what I would eat, for all the crap that I would eat. I think it was burning or destroying the valve that was going into my stomach. And so a lot of times in the middle of the night, my stomach, whatever bile, would just throw it up into my system, and it would burn the crap out of me. It was just an awful existence, drinking all that pop and eating all that food. And I'm sure that was my body rejecting it, going, you ate the Stouffer's meatloaf again, huh? Do you have any? There's like no meat in that. That's just like, I don't know what's in it. I'm not gonna make any claim or accusations, but whatever's in it, you know, I mean, if you studied the court cases, the Franken meat, where the judge called the chicken McNuggets from years ago at McDonald's Franken meat because there was so much dead chemical food that was in there. And I really started learning that there's a difference between food and nutritious food and just dead food. There really isn't nutritious. It's just taking up space. One of the things I talked about in the previous podcast too is we tend to eat for and I got this from, I believe, Penn Jillette's book and Cray Ray, we tend to eat for a winter that never comes. When we used to be plant eaters and living caveman times, we had to eat and forage for food while we could during the months that our grain and our fields would grow, so that we could survive the winters where the stuff wouldn't grow and we'd be locked in the cave and trying to, you know, live off our own fat stores. And that's why you store fat, is because your body is storing for a winter that never comes. We don't suffer from freezing cold winters anymore because during the freezing cold winters, I can turn my heater up to 72 and I'm just cozy and fine. But I still have all these fat stores that my body said, yeah, throw that on there too. So there's that. So a lot of great stuff that's happening in Chile, which I think is brilliant for them to finally do. Sadly, a lot of this comes, excuse me, a lot of this comes too late. Probably should drink more of this coffee here. Tasty beverage. And I think it's good that we're doing this. Unfortunately, it's a huge battle. It took them about 10 years in Chile to win this fight and battle with the corporations. You know, we really have to, on one hand, you know, I dealt with this when I was talking about losing weight and realizing how poisonous and traitorous my food was. I mean, I started learning that when I would go in the store, I'd look at those Hostess Ding Dongs or those Hostess Twinkies that I used to love and the Mountain Dew and feel betrayed. And that I got lied to. I got lied to by those cartoon characters. I got lied to by all of them that says, oh, this is a healthy treat. You know, this is healthy. This is snack free. You know, oh, you need to eat. You know, there's more protein in whatever. That's the favorite thing they love to sell. There's more protein in it. And, you know, along with high fructose sugar being the #1 ingredient, you're like, but I'm eating my protein. Well, you know, it's like when my friend asked me, how do you get your energy up? You know, how do you get your caffeine? Well, I drink coffee and take B12 vitamins and not living on the crash roller coaster of sugar. So I don't have to get up that high because I'm not down that low, if that makes any sense. I'm stable. So I think it's pretty interesting. It's an interesting article you should check out on the NewYorkTimes.com. And of course, the writer was Andrew Jacobs, so you can search for it that way. But I think this is really important because kids grow up at such an impressionable age. The Twix Bunny, Tony the Tiger, you know, I mean, even the Coca-Cola folks have the polar bears that they drag out every winter, and they do that. You know, it's interesting. We need to realize that you know, they have these issues, but it's really significant in Chile because they used to have malnutrition, so everyone's probably really skinny, and now a bunch of fat fucks like me. So there you go. So hopefully someday we'll reach this point. But as I mentioned just earlier before I segued, what I learned from my experience is that I need to be self-actualized. You need to be self-actualized. Each of us have to take responsibility for what we're putting in our fucking mouth. Because I don't have a corporation sitting there with a fork going, open wide, Chris, shoving the shit into my mouth. I'm the idiot with the fork shoveling the poison food into my mouth. This is the guy who's responsible. The jackass holding the spoon, fork, knife, Coca-Cola can, whatever is in these two hands that's shoving whatever into this orifice, is the responsible one. doesn't help. And I think it's good what they're doing in Chile, where they make it so that the kids aren't learning this sort of bad behaviors. And actually the kids are learning to see that, oh, that's bad for me, I shouldn't eat it. And giving them some education. But really, it comes down to each of us. We've got to self-educate ourselves. We've got to take control of what we're putting in our mouth. You know, one of the tricks I learned, I believe, I don't remember where I learned this from. I think it was a Facebook group, but someone had a line: if it's in your house, it's in your mouth, which means if you buy bad poison shit food, you bring it home, it's going to end up in your mouth, because you're going to be hungry one day. You might have the munchies. You might just be hungry. And you're like, look, a bag of Hostess Ding Dongs. I'll have one. Yeah, I'll have two. It's a special day. I'll have four. And then the bag's gone. And then you hate yourself. And then you go, oh, I'll never do it again. And then you buy Hostess Twinkies, Ding Dongs, whatever, next time you go to the store. And you're like, well, I'll put them in the pantry. I won't eat them. I'll save them for the kids. I think a lot of people love that excuse. So there you go. That's kind of the journey that I went on with some of my losing weight and everything else, and how I lost 70 pounds in 3 months, basically, in just realizing how poisonous my food was, and cutting off the poison feed, and cutting off the shit I was putting personally in my mouth. So yeah, on one hand, I think it would help if we reached with fat and obesity and sugar a new level. And I think we're going to get to that, but I think it has to become a real crisis point in this country. And hopefully we'll get to that point that we got to with smoking, where we realize that these, the guys who were doing the same thing in the chemical labs, making cigarettes and prepping cigarettes and making them, that they're doing now with food. They were sitting in there going, how much tar and nicotine, and how can we make this so fucking addictive that people can't give it up? I remember years ago, I had a friend who he went through a rough life, and he was a drug dealer, or he had been a drug dealer. He was a reformed drug dealer. He'd gotten his shit together, and he gone on to do some things, and he straightened out his life. But as a drug dealer, he'd been on cocaine, heroin, crack. I mean, you name it. He'd worked the gamut, meth, and of course he'd sell it, and he was selling to support his own habit. And I remember we were sitting down one time, and he said, Chris, I got to tell you, I beat crack, meth, cocaine, all the drugs that I've ever been on, that I've ever taken. I've beaten them all. I've said no. I've cleaned up my life, and I've stopped them all. He goes, but the one thing I cannot fucking stop, for I don't know why. I don't know what they put in cigarettes, but I cannot stop smoking. It's the hardest drug out of all those insane drugs. Now, for me, I've never done any of this stuff. So there's been a dabble with, I think, cocaine, and I think I held a cigarette and smoked it, or tried to smoke it once. And of course I coughed and went, this is awful. Why would anyone want to do this? And when I was a teenager. And he's like, whatever they put in those cigarettes, I don't know how to get off of them. They're so addictive. And that's what they did in these labs with these smoking corporations. Same thing with what they're doing with our food now. They're genetically modifying it and engineering it in a lab, and they're turning us into their lab rats and go, let them have that. Hope they can give that up. We designed that for maximum addiction, maximum fatness, maximum, turning on the things in their brain that get them hooked onto our food and everything else. It is a form of a drug when it comes down to it in reality. Some people you're like, well, I never get, I don't take drugs, or I don't get hooked on cocaine, or I don't get hooked on heroin. Meanwhile, they're holding, a big gulp, 64 ounce of Coke, and a fistful of fucking donuts and Krispy Kreme donuts. Like, I don't take drugs. And you're just like, no, you're actually taking some sort of synthetic thing that's designed to jack your brain and take you on a high ride that you're eventually going to crash from. And then when you crash, you're going to go looking for more of that to feed your addiction. So there you go. And, you know, that's where we're at. So hopefully we get a chance to fix that stuff. All I can say is educate your children, educate yourself as to how poisonous their food is. Take my example of, wow, you know, I meet all these people that are like, wow, if I could just lose like 10 to 15 pounds, I'm like, quit drinking pop. And I'm like, will that work? Let's see. I quit and lost 70 pounds in 3 months, and I didn't exercise. Yeah, that tells you how poisonous that fucking shit is for you. And of course, you can go online. You can read lots of other health deterrents that come with drinking pop. You know, it inhibits your building of bone structure and weakens your bones and everything else. Whether you don't believe them or not, do you really want to gamble with that? You're gambling with your health and your life. And of course, as you reach my age, you start to focus on quality of life because you're like, well, that doesn't work anymore. So I guess we're going to have to try and figure out how to get through the rest of life without that. And let's try and figure out how to keep everything else from falling apart off the rails, you know? Well, the knee's making clicking now. That's nice. I guess that's the new normal. And we got to do some stuff to make sure that, you know, it doesn't get worse and we can maintain a quality of life. One of my friends, I think it was the 40-year-old virgin, she was on the podcast. I'd really highly recommend you check her out. And my name escapes her at this point in time, but she's the, did I say 40-year-old virgin? There's that. Everyone's like, oh, I want to look that up, Chris. No, 40-year-old vegan. 40-year-old vegan. Probably should have some more coffee here, Chris. Maybe I do need him out. So, still waiting for that B12 to kick in. I didn't put it on my tongue like I should have. I just shot it. And it moves faster if you put it on your tongue. So anyway, the 40-year-old vegan, get that correct, was on the podcast. And she made a statement to me. She says, you know, one of the things is we're not living longer. We're dying longer. So let me repeat that. We're not living longer. We're dying longer. Now, if you're familiar with your genetics and how things work, for most of us, especially male, we reach the peak of the quality of our life and how we're regenerating our cells and everything else at about 20, maybe 25. And after that, we begin declining. We begin slowing down. We begin slowing down regeneration and rebuilding of our body, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all downhill from there, pretty much. We peak at like 20. I mean, if you remember what you were like at 20, you're fucking, you know, you didn't hardly eat anything. Your body was on 1,000%. You're rock and roll. And we're designed to be that way. In fact, if anything, it's kind of funny. You know, I just recently turned 50. And when you really think about it, 100 years ago, in fact, think even less than that, most people didn't live beyond 60 or 50. In fact, when they created Social Security and they gave it a 65 mark to get Social Security, they used the number 65 because almost no one was getting to 65. So it was like so far out of reach. They're like, maybe 10% of the people use that because they're never making it 65. And so now we're living far beyond an age where up to 100 years ago, we used to die in the 40s and 50s of our age. To where now we're living into closing in on the hundreds when it comes down to it. But the problem is our quality of life isn't getting much better. It kind of is, I suppose, in some ways when it comes to some of the healthcare and options that we have. But for the most part, our bodies are still declining and going in the shit skids. And because we're living longer, the shit skids are going on for longer. So there's that. So you have to look at quality of life. And so I think each of us, and if you're a parent with a child, you've got to educate your kids on nutrition, what is good food for them, what is poison food, how food is bad for them, what they put in their mouth, why it's important. And the other thing is too, is your DNA. You know, DNA and the makeup of what you've inherited from your parents is a very important factor. Uh, for me, my mom was overweight for most of my life. God bless her. But she struggled with weight, like I have all my life, and I inherited a lot of her genetics. I used to have a friend who's a really good friend, and he used to eat Taco Bell all day long, and he would eat the sugary cereals and everything. And he always had this like ripped chest and great arm muscles, and he had the cut jaw and kind of the Cro-Magnon sort of look. And I would just be like, I can't eat like you. If I eat like you, I gain 50 pounds, and you eat like you don't even go to the gym, and you look like you go to the gym all the time. I hate you. And he's like, Chris, it's part of it's just genetics. And so we have to look at ourselves, especially if we're obese parents, and go, why am I obese and what am I putting in my mouth? But also, what am I teaching my children? Because my children have got to fight to lose weight and to be healthy far more than other people do with other DNA. And I think that's the elephant in the room we all need to look at. We all need to say, hey, you know what? Not everyone's the same, and we've got to combat a whole lot. For me, I have to work out a whole lot harder. I have to eat a whole lot more better than my friend who lived at Taco Bell, and he every morning he eat a big bowl of probably Twix for kids, that whole sugary crap, and he just always seemed healthy and fine. Now I'm sure that as he grows older, that's going to catch up to him. Like, I used to be really skinny, and I'd be like 10 to 15 Mountain Dews a day. I can do weight, and I can have myself jacked up so much that I'm sure I'm burning all that stuff. Well, I think as you can see now before you, all those Mountain Dews did not stack up well, and they caught up to me. So I think we have to teach your children this. We have to self-actualize. Now, you can run in the streets and scream the sky is falling, corporations are turning us into food lab rats. But really, in the end, we have a personal responsibility. And what you will buy at the store teaches. I remember seeing a Walmart 60 Minutes commercial where they talked about how Walmart was trying to introduce more vegan stuff, more healthy organic stuff into their things. But they came out and they said, look, consumers, you've got to buy this stuff. You've got to show us you're willing to buy it. You've got to show us you're willing to invest in it. And if you will buy it, we'll put more stuff on the shelves. And so more and more stores now have opened up to vegan eating, healthy eating. One of the things I really love nowadays that I discovered when I was losing my weight was crushed cauliflower and how you can use that in a lot of different things. There's people that make actually crushed cauliflower doughed pizza. They make the dough out of the crushed cauliflower. And there's so many different vegan options that are out there where you can eat well, you can eat good live foods, and very tasty foods. That was the other thing I went through with my journey, was learning how to make great tasting live fresh foods to where you're not just going, oh, it's broccoli again, and being able to make broccoli with seasoning and taste and texture and wonderful stuff that you're going to enjoy. I did the same thing with tofu. I mean, I never wanted to touch that nasty, slimy, gross tofu that, I had it once or twice. It was poorly seasoned, and it was just, it was like running little goldfish down your mouth that were squirming around. It was slimy and ugh. And you're just like, what am I eating? This is some sort of organic jello that's just nasty, and it doesn't even taste good because it doesn't have the sugar that jello has. So, we all have to take responsibility for what we put in our mouth and what we're seeing. But I think if you're a parent, I think if you're an educator, I think if you're an influencer, like someone like me who wants to share their stories so that maybe they can save other people some pain and suffering, or maybe they help them out of pain and suffering that I used to go through, and maybe help them with their journey if they want to take that upon themselves. So real important there. And I think if enough of us start doing that, of course, the corporations will have to change. You've seen Coca-Cola, of course, has had to change their mantra now to where they've had to market water, and they've had to market things that are a lot less healthier. And in fact, we've seen pop sales drop and everything else. But they figure out all sorts of different ways to wiggle in these chemicals, wiggle in these high fructose syrups into other stuff. Part of my journey of losing weight was in reading the nutrition labels on the back. I'd be like, why the hell is there corn syrup in, what I was eating at the time? I'm like, why is that necessary? And that's necessary to get those factors that are in your brain that create that opiate addiction, those receptors that go, that's what I get, and get you to want to have more and get you addicted to their poison food. So anyway, I'll wrap that up. You can go to the NewYorkTimes.com, February 7th, 2018. I highly recommend you read the article and kind of educate yourself on what's going on. And maybe as a parent, and this is written by Andrew Jacobs once again, so thanks to him. So maybe as a parent, you want to get educated on some of the stuff. Maybe you want to start watching the commercials on TV. Maybe you want to start seeing what's going on. Now, one final trick I'll close with here that someone taught me a long time ago. The way a food store is built is for ease of restockment, okay? So what they do is on the outside of the store that's close to the doors, they put the produce, because the produce has a high turnover rate and high restock rate because it's fresh and it tends to die quickly, because it's live food and it only survives for so long. So they tend to put on the outside parts of the store close to the doors so they can easily take out the bad food, load in the good food, and everything else. Closer you get to the center of the store, that takes them longer to restock and deliver foods, the deader the foods are. In most of your stores, the most deadest food is, of course, the frozen food in the center. And usually when it's frozen, you think it's safe. Turns out they blanch a lot of sodium that they don't put on the labels a lot of times, I found out, to get it to stay frozen and, of course, preserve it even more so. And then, of course, outside of the frozen foods, you have the dead foods, the wheat thins and the stuff, the Doritos and the stuff that God knows what it is some sort of chemically produced, infused poison. It's not even food if you really look at the nutrition labels in the back or read the ingredients and what they're about. It's not the basis of quality of food compared to what you get from eating an apple or an orange or banana or lettuce or some sort of other nutrition rich food is miles apart. It's like going from the earth to the Mars. It comes in the distance of what is real nutrition for you. You're just basically consuming chemicals at a certain point, and great soda crack whores and heroin junkies and everything else. And of course, these chemicals are designed to manipulate you and addict you. So anyway, it looks like one thing they even did is they banned the sale of candy that trinkets. Like they banned the. I remember when I was a kid, you always wanted that candy sucker ring, and you thought that was so cool and it looked like a big jewel on your thing. I remember it was kind of insane. I remember as a kid, you could buy candy cigarettes. You walk around and puff cigarettes and think you're really cool. In fact, my friends in church, the deacons up front, would used to pull these stunts to get everybody talking, and they would take candy cigarettes and they'd take, I think it was Banaka? Yeah, it was Banaka. And so what they do is they spray some Banaka in their mouth as they sit in the pews, and they would look like they were smoking, and then they go, and the Banaka would go out, and you're like, they're smoking in the front row of the church. And that's what was going on. Kids were emulating smoking, and buying candy cigarettes. What do you think most of those people grew up did? Well, we had candy cigarettes, so now we're going to smoke. And we knew we were cool. We had candy cigarettes. And, we saw guys on TV use cigarettes and how great they were. So we got to do the same thing with food. We've got to take a look at food and realize that some stuff isn't nutritious. Some stuff is very traitorous. And no matter how much big corporations say this food is good for you and it's nutritional and all that sort of good stuff, it's just bullshit, and they're just lying to you. So anyway, so I've gone on for quite some time, but hopefully I've educated you guys with some different stuff. We'll be doing a format where if I don't have a guest, we'll be trying to do podcasts where I talk about something that I'm passionate about, that's interesting for the day, something that motivates me and I hope motivates you or educates you. And maybe I'll get some education from it as well and share it with you. So thanks for tuning in. We certainly appreciate you guys as an audience. Thanks for being with me here today. Please share the podcast. Refer it to a friend, neighbor, relative, pool boy, mistress. Get everybody in on the action, really, when it comes down to us. When you've got the pool boy over your house when your husband's out of town and he's cleaning the pool, of course, whatever that means. I don't have a pool, Chris. Then share the podcast with him while he's cleaning the pool. I don't know, whatever. It's a thing. So anyway, certainly appreciate you guys in audience. Go to iTunes, of course. Go to Google Play. You can subscribe there. You can also subscribe on YouTube and probably just about other podcast app that's out there. We'll try and bring you more educational stuff, and I certainly love and appreciate you guys as an audience. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.